guess, and I'll start with a question for everyone first, but one of the things I think was fairly evident in the speech today was risk appetite. And I think all of the companies and bodies that you represent, that's a crucial thing to consider, your risk appetite. Where you are in your own particular business cycle, where your company's at, how much the need to innovate is. I might start with you, Tim. I guess, you are at Qantas now. We have a company that is facing, as an industry, the airline industry is facing a very challenging period, and you're custodian of that brand across everything from consumers, flights, planes. How is the risk appetite and the model determine how you manage that?
That's a good question, Mark. I think I'd like to sort of frame it slightly differently, I guess, in the sense that risk appetite tends to probably bring up notions of commercial risk and appetite rather than necessarily sort of anything else. And obviously we're fairly dominant in the news at the moment. The way I would frame it is that I think that design or innovation or pioneering is part of the DNA of certain businesses, and we're 93 years old and we've got a pioneering spirit that has sort of always been there. So I think from a design perspective, if you try to equate it to appetite, is very strong because it's been part of our DNA, if you like, for 93 years. So as pioneers of inventing business class and through to design, I guess more visibly today through our work with Mark Newson for the lounges and for the products such as our Skybed seats and cutlery and crockery and sort of everything else, or Martin Grant from a fashion uniform perspective, even Neil Perry from a sort of food and beverage sort of offering and the work that goes into that. It's very much part of what we see we have to continue to do to serve up to our customers.
And I was going to ask you, Katie, at Heinz, you work with a lot of established brands. Reinventing brands, how important is design at that level when you do have a golden circle where you've worked for the past few years, is a brand that most of our grandparents would be familiar with. When you're reinventing something, how important is it to get design in at that very early level?
I'd suggest it's critical. If I think about the Golden Circle brand, and as many of you, I hope, nearly all of you in the room would be very familiar with the brand. The brand is over 70 years old. Certainly to consumers, it's considered traditional, trusted, well-liked, but it does have an issue with relevance, or it has had an issue with relevance and uniqueness. So design has really been the competitive advantage that we had to bring to the forefront over the last few years to make sure that we do have that competitive advantage. We've brought our design partners in from the very start, and certainly it has made all the difference in terms of consumers' attitudes and usage of the brand. Design has really helped lead that. So in the market today, I think you'll see Golden Circle really standing apart from its competitors, and that's largely to do with its new design.
George, your company is you're probably best placed to answer this, because Laminex, in developing new products, which is, I think, fairly central to your business, do you get design in at the very early level? But not design, but design as in when you're talking about taking the product to market. I mean, how do you work the process?
Yeah, I guess I'll try and tie that back to your theme of risk. We're inspired by people like David Kelly, the founder of Stanford Design School, who coined the term relentless innovation. So Laminex habitually and religiously releases somewhere between 18 and 22 range updates and new products a year. And that requires a fair bit of energy and design think if you're an Australian-based manufacturer in a risk-averse corporate culture. I guess one of the things that we've seen is that we've abandoned historical and traditional stage gate processes where everything's got to be perfect before you launch to market, and instead designs at the front end of that process whereby we prototype. One of the central pillars of design thinking is this whole concept of iterative design, prototyping, and we actually release in controlled experiments lots of little products to little control groups. And we're not looking to celebrate success, we're looking to celebrate failure. Because when you celebrate failure in product design, you learn about the mistake that you would have otherwise made and learnt about after launch. And so risk is being dealt with in our organisation by incorporating design and design principles right at the start of the process. And for us, it's more than just decor and brand and product. It's about the processes that we believe in and the behaviours that we use as a team.
Fantastic. And I was going to ask you, Brian, football, it's such a unique business model. I mean, even just the measuring success from off-field success to on-field success on the sporting field. But football has been an incredibly innovative area. How does design work? How does that enter your thinking in your role? And I'm probably in particular thinking about your work on your new stadium and your customer experience.
Yeah, there's no doubt that design plays a huge role in developing a master plan for the stadium and the themes that we have around the stadium, and they link into our values. Also in fan engagement, taking the armchair supporter to become not so much fanatical but much more passionate, and there is also a commercial return in doing that. The design, the visual presentation of how we do that is really important. But I think the major area where we use design is simply in trying to maintain our competitive advantage. And we live in a really equalised industry where talent is shared amongst all the clubs equally, supposedly, as is income. And so in that sort of environment, you say, well, what are your competitive advantages? And in our world, it's more things like, great leadership, great values, great culture, great planning, those sort of things. And the constant throughout all of that is values. And so the issue for us is how do we visually present our values in all areas of our football club, whether it be our business plan, our membership, or whatever the case may be, so that we can attract people and maintain that attraction.
And I think that links very much back to Søren, something that you were talking about during your presentation, and that is culture. That the organisations that tend to succeed have design and innovation at the heart of their culture. I was interested, you were talking about Apple, and a company that you've highlighted has had a tremendous history of innovation and success, but also was 90 days away from bankruptcy. I guess, how much do companies have to get to that desperate level sometimes before they innovate and take those risks? Or do you think that the better managed companies have it in their DNA?
That's what I call an excellent question, right? So the best time to start to do any form of innovation is when you're doing absolute your best. The worst time to start experimenting is when you're at your worst, right? So when you're at your worst, that's actually not the time. You're doing it out of desperation because the alternative is that somebody's going to be paying for your bankruptcy, right? So the trick, of course, is to do it when you're at your top. And I would say BMW would be an excellent example of that they were basically super successful, and they had cars that everybody loved, and then they came out with cars that everybody hated, right? And that type of leap of faith, you do not want to take that type of leap of faith if you're not doing well. And then, it took a year, 2 years before, the consumer, the users got familiar with the new BMW look and started loving it, right? And became accustomed to it. And, within a year from the original launch, Mercedes and Honda and Toyota and Lexus, they were all copying the BMW design, right? So you want to do it when you are at your absolute height to reduce your risk, and the worst risk is when you're at your worst. So the answer is no, but of course the people that pay for the party when it goes wrong are the people that pay for your bankruptcy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And look, I know you have only spent a short time in Australia, but we were speaking backstage before. What's your early view of Australian companies and probably Australian education bodies too? Are we behind the curve at this, in your views on incorporating design at the very early levels, getting our business schools and our design students to talk to each other?
So let me start on a positive note. I think you're doing excellent on design research, and I'm looking at Ken in the audience now. I think you have taken Swinburne, and I think you take design research in Australia and put it on the map. Everybody are familiar with that. So I definitely kudos to that. Where I see an opportunity to improve would integrating design and business. So if you look at Art Center College Design, right, which is #2 design school in the world, I believe. They are working together with Peter Drucker Business School in Claremont, creating a Masters of Industrial Design, MBA in Industrial Design, right? So the integration between business design, the Haas business school at Berkeley are doing with the CCA, and so forth. PolyU, as a Hong Kong Polytechnic University, is integrating business into and business degrees, business masters and design. So, as I say in my family, maybe it's because my family are growers in sixth generation. We're very practical people. They say, it doesn't matter what you do and what your major is, as long as you minor in business, right? So I think it's crucial for designers and for design to make the next step, to be able to think in terms of business, because it doesn't help if you have the best product in the world, if it's only your mother and your sister and that appreciate it.
Fantastic. Brian, just back to Geelong and that football model of yours. In terms of on-field, do you have much when you've got a company that has multiple facets of what it does? And I'll probably, Tim and others on the panel, you can answer this question too. How do you have crossover? Do you find you have cross-pollination of ideas and other parts of the business driving each other?
Yes, we do. I think one of the values that probably stands out more than any in our organisation is teamwork, in terms of what we try and do in collaboration. Having said that, we do it as well as anyone in the AFL, but I still think we're only about 5 out of 10. And there's a huge stretch there, I think, to be gained, a huge advantage for those sides to do it much, much better. And so when you talk about design, we would involve design in many of our work parties that goes across departments. Okay, and it's simple things like the use of player appearances in engaging with our fans, and design would be in that. And so that's one of the examples. But having said that, I still believe there is a long way to go in our organisation, in our industry, for it to work properly.
And George?
Yeah, so the biggest single influence on our design is really customers. Involving them in the design of your products and services really can do amazing things for your business, and it has for us. I guess at the essence of good design is empathy for customers, and that requires a different skill. It's really not about large research studies. It's about observation, and increasingly there's a language in business around voice of the customer, a day in the life of, and the recent resurgence of customer centricity. What you're looking for is not a 200-page report, it's an insight. It's a little frustration expressed by your customer. You might have to sit with them for the entire day and be very neutral and open in your questioning and just watch long periods of silence. But invariably, you'll get to a little bit of body language or a little bit of a rant. And that rant is really a physical manifestation of what I like to call the customer's work around your product or service incompetence. Often customers have to design workarounds in order to be able to do with your product what should have been designed in there in the first place. And that's a moment of gold. If you can find a single insight for one customer, it's often the case that that's scalable and that there are a million other customers out there that are experiencing that exact same frustration with your service or your product. Developing a solution to that pain point is called sustainable competitive advantage. And I think that unless you have that kind of engagement with your customer, you don't get to enjoy that experience.
And I guess that gets back to what you were saying, that good design from the outset, good culture, engaging with your customers can feed back into the bottom line. Tim, I guess you've worked with some of the biggest brands in the country previously, from NAB to Tourism Australia. Is that something you believe?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just putting the Qantas hat on, I guess one of the things that in our category, if you like, is unique as far as the sort of customer journey is concerned, is that we have touch points, many touch points over a very protracted period of time. Some people think about travelling over many months. So we kind of have interaction with them during that period, then the lead up to actually getting on the plane, and whether they're on the plane for an hour or for sort of 22 hours, that's often the shortest part of the journey that they sort of have with us. So one of our challenges is the abundance of insights and the experiences that we have to sort of deal with and to sort of work through that, I guess, to be able to understand where the real needs are and what are the things that we can do to innovate and to design that will have a sort of dynamic differentiation for us.
And Katie, I guess too with Heinz, I mean, a huge customer base. How do you engage that customer base with the design team at the very outset of redesigning, repackaging, relaunching new products or existing products?
So I guess for us, the customer is certainly at the forefront of everything that we do. So when I talk about customer, we have customer in terms of consumer, but we have customer in terms of our customer being the retailers. And obviously we need to work very closely with both to ensure success. So I think in marketing in general, we are very focused on consumer and insights, but sometimes we have to really ensure that we're much closer to our customer. And I think the great success we've had in the past has come from doing that. Activation in store, so taking design not just from product or the label, but through to the activation in store, so you ensure that the experience our shopper is having in our customer's store is one of something that they will remember and be a positive memory. That's something that you really our design partners have to be part of from the start. And that's where we're seeing great success. So, understanding your customer, understanding your consumer, they are different, and understanding that the shopper experience ultimately is where we need to win in the FMCG environment. So therefore, design is at the forefront of all of that.
So one of the interesting things you were talking about was the black horse approach. How sometimes to get the best result, you actually have to retreat and go in a completely opposite direction. I was going to ask you to elaborate on that a little bit more, and I was going to ask our panellists if that's something that they've tried in their businesses, or if that's something that's worked for you in the past.
I'm so glad you're asking me that question. I was just sitting and thinking about, so whenever there is a business opportunity, right, it's when there's a contradiction. So you look at the world in one way, and the opportunity is in a different way, right? Otherwise, everybody had seen it, and there wouldn't be a business opportunity anymore. And what one of my collaborators, Soup in Seoul, have found out is that we all talk about cross-functional collaboration, people working together, communicating, and getting things done together. That's very good for incremental innovation, right? So what happens is the moment you cross-functional collaborate, you create what's called meaningful product. People that are useful, appropriate, marketable products that work. That's the good thing about it. The bad thing about cross-functional collaboration is that novelty or innovativeness drops. So it's not really good for innovation. So breakthrough innovation does not happen. Unfortunately, and I guess I'm a democratic person by nature, so, but if you want to do something that's breakthrough, you basically need to have some single-minded, impossible to work with, tyrannic individuals. Well, at least people that have a certain amount of forcefulness to get things through, right? They need to be able to see things that the contradictions that everybody else can't see. And one of my favorite examples, and talking with a couple of people about it here over the week, is that if you look at the Eiffel Tower, right? Everybody hated the Eiffel Tower when it was being designed. Paris wanted to kill the person, Eiffel, that developed the Eiffel Tower. The worst thing you could do to their city, right? The only good thing was that it was going to come down very soon after the World Fair. If you look at the Sydney Opera Hall, right? There's nobody that hated the Sydney Opera Hall with as much passion as the Australians, right? When it's being developed, it's over budget, over time, it's worth, and somebody told me here that I think it's in the 40 or 50 billions of dollars of return that building has created. So now everybody loves it, right? And the same with the Dongdaemun Design Plaza in Seoul today. Everybody hates it. It just opened in March. And, let's see if it hasn't, is this changing? So the problem is that, when it comes to doing something that's not incremental, but breakthrough, it takes an ability to deal with a contradiction, and it needs some kind of unique insight, which is different unfortunately, from cross-functional collaboration.
And panelists, have you had any black horse moments in your careers?
Yeah, I guess Søren triggered a recent memory. I was asked to speak at an innovation conference not long ago, and I guess my contention is that the gap between entrepreneurs and corporates has never been larger, and some of the most exciting innovation that's going on in the business space is coming from punchy, little disrespectful startups who, without any access to capital or resources, are taking on very large global segments and brands. And there's probably 3 examples that I celebrate. We all have a copy, by the way, of Steve Jobs' biography on our shelves at home, but the stories that get told around barbecues are around some of these little businesses that are very interesting. So Warby Parker, founded by Dave Gilboa, will send you 5 sets of designer eyewear to your home for free. And in doing so, you'll be able to get the opinions of 60 people that you work, play and live with, as opposed to just the opinion of your partner when you're walking through Westfield and decide to pop in at OPSM. It's more than an internet-based model. It's fundamentally changed the equation for the consumer, because you can do it in the comfort of your own home. You get many, many, many more points of contact with advisors. And for that organisation, they don't need a retail footprint or that $350,000 machine in the back room, which has to take your eye prescription. We sort of celebrate Georgia Beatty here in Melbourne with Lupe Wines, who pioneered the single-serve wine glass with a foil seal, because there's a huge segment of people that don't want to drink the whole bottle of wine. They want a glass, and they don't want one rolling around on the back seat, a bottle rolling around on the back seat of the car or sitting in the fridge forever. A 4-pack sits nicely on the back seat, stacks better, and otherwise represents a single-serve consumption of red or white wine. And I think that's very exciting. The final one, depending on whether you're male or female, you're shaving every day or otherwise less regularly. And I guess, what must Gillette be thinking when you've got organisations like Razor Pit, who have truly gone through a business model innovation and said, why not sharpen your disposable razors? Next time you go and buy a pack of Gillette Mach 3 or whatever the brand is, you'll pay $22 for 5 razors. And here's a punchy little organisation that says, sharpen your disposable razor and get 95% more use out of it. And I think those entrepreneurs behind those organisations are huge inspirations for business today, because they ask the question, why are you all walking towards the cliff like lemmings? Why do you behave in the way that you do? We have a different thought process, and we'd like to change your user experience. And for me, they're the stories that are being celebrated around barbecues.
And so, just before we wrap up, any final thoughts on that link between design at the outset and driving bottom line success?
So let me put it this way. I think the most important thought, I think, if Ansar, right, is 100 years ago since we got massacred in Turkey. Right? Malcolm Gladwell just came out a book called David and Goliath, and if you read that one, there's an example of wars the last 200 years. And of those wars, they looked at wars where the opponents was a factor 10 size difference. So 5 million people against 50 million people, 10 million people against 100 million people, right? So we talk about a factor 10 different size of the countries. And when you look at those kind of types of wars the last 200 years, the underdog wins in 60% of the cases. So countries that are a tenth of the attacker, right, wins in 60% of the cases, which I think is very thought-provoking when you look at General Motors and the 3 big, right? We look at Nokia, right? Things can change really quickly, and it's not like they're very unlikely to happen. They're actually more likely than not to happen.
Fantastic. And for an Australian audience, we do like to back the underdog, so I think that's a very good way to finish. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please thank Søren and our panellists for today.
This morning's event, of course, is part of Melbourne International Design Week and the state government's initiative of Design Matters. I think we seriously appreciate the government's strong commitment to design and the belief that the benefits of design in increasing productivity and improving the quality of our lives is obviously essential in where we're going and what we're trying to do.